Hi, everybody. Welcome. So, today we're going to talk about singing in tune again. It's such an important part of singing in general, of course. There's multiple things that we need to work on when we're learning how to sing in tune. And so, please feel free to ask questions as we do this. I'm always trying to find slightly different approaches to help us find the most optimal tuning and trying to classify like what things are going wrong when we're not finding tuning, because it's not just like the note's right here, just try to hit the note. There's all sorts of reasons why we can have issues. And today, I also, for anyone who follows my stuff, I want to go over solfege and talk about how that's useful, why we use numbers at first, because it's sort of a simple shorthand, but why actually solfege can be really, really helpful when you're getting specific, when music gets a little more challenging, and how actually the vowel shapes in our solfege, and I'm talking about like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, how the vowel shapes actually help guide our voice a little bit and get the right sort of resonance to make sure that we're staying in tune. So that's going to be part of this. So yeah, again, please feel free to ask questions, especially if I've got some new people here. Hi, welcome. And we'll go over all of this. So I really find intonation to be one of the most essential skills that a singer has. It's usually what people notice when things aren't going right, is when we're just not hitting the right targets. So again, think about singing in tune as target practice. And there's two things that we really need. We need to know where the targets are, right? So that's the conceptual kind of mental theory-based aspect. Oh, that's so great. I love hearing when people are improving from doing all of this stuff and getting that external feedback. That's really, really helpful. So we've got figuring out where the target is and then how we get our voice through the target or to the right place. I actually like to start first with the physical mechanism just to make sure that we can move our voice around. And in general, when we're working on target practice, when we're learning songs, I think one of the healthiest techniques you can do is to stay really light on your voice at first. Really make sure that you have a clear sense of where you're going, and then start applying more physical kind of tactics to really project your sound and get like full expression. But generally, actually, it's just like a pro tip is first we want to really make sure that we have a clear sense of where the targets are before we start trying to throw our voice around. And that's when we're particularly learning a song. But in this practice in general, I find that the best thing you can do is stay really light on your voice. So the first thing we're going to do is just make sure that we have control over the contour of our pitch, which is our ability to move it up and down and feel that direct one-to-one relationship with our breath pressure. So you're going to want to fill up in your belly and your back, expand low. And there's this feeling of gently resisting against our exhale. And I just, I want to pause for a moment and explain this because it's really nuanced. At some point we'll go deep into the breath and breath support and how it works. But there's moments where we're leaning against the breath and it feels like it pushes out. And then our natural breath is always caving in, but we're creating resistance against that. And it's helping us make a more even breath control. So if we're over thrusting in any direction, we're often going to be a little unwieldy and not controlling our pitch very accurately. So in general, we want to stay expanded and push delicately against our exhale, which is caving in. And it creates this look of like floating or suspension. And that's actually the best way to control our pitch. So what we're going to do is some basic SOVTs to feel this first. I do the Z a lot, but let's do some of the other ones. So thinking about like an M, for example, it's like we have a vowel shape. We don't want this to be closed and be like, but instead, and we're calibrating a little bit, right? Stay really light. I'm going through my registers. I'm going up into head voice a little bit. Again, this practice is best if we're not getting too heavy, because then we tend to get a lot of tension as we work on our pitch practice. So I'm going to do that first again. I'm just feeling as I gently lean down and out, my pitch rises. And then as I let it relax and the air release a little more, the pitch is going to fall. I'm just sort of scanning that and getting comfortable with those directions. So again, just like this. Good, good, good. Let's do the next one. This is an N. I'm putting my tongue up like this, and this just helps me make sure my jaw can stay pretty relaxed. And I go, mm, mm. So first thing is just being very loose, right? Can I go up and down? You can do an NG as well, right? It could be like, this is it's generally actually a very light sensation unless we're belting or doing specific kind of stylistic stuff. You can actually sing in this very, very delicate place all the time, and it's a great way to practice your pitch. So that's the first thing. Just make sure that you have control over those directions. If you're still like, I can't get my voice to move up and down, or you're not sure, meet with a teacher. You can look at one of these websites that help us actually get feedback of where our pitch is, like Singing Carrots. I find that one to be really helpful. They have a pitch practice thing that you can do, and it as you're sort of singing, it'll show you where you are on the piano. And of course, you can use a piano, like I use a piano all the time, or a guitar, although that sometimes can be a little challenging with the scales if you're not used to doing that. With the piano, you can just really press spots and try to match it. And that leads us to the next thing, which is how do we actually learn to correct our pitch? Let me see what you're saying here. Yeah, so singing books are really great. They help to affirm what we're talking about here. This is just a question that someone's asking. I find that sometimes if you get too conceptual about it, you're missing the practice, which is a feeling-based practice. You really have to try these things out and get hands-on about it. But yes, 100%. Everybody learns differently, and I like to use the written articles and sometimes scientific studies about how anatomy is working. But also you have to really explore with your voice and feel these things out. So that's the first kind of game. Oh, and I forgot, so we're doing the SOVT thing, and then let's do just an open vowel for a second as well, just to feel this out. We'll keep it very narrow this time. We're just going to do like an oo or an e. And again, I'm not worried about trying to stay in my chest voice for too long. I'm just keeping this very, very light and delicate, going like, ooh. Right, just letting my mouth gently sort of open and relax as the pitch is rising and falling. And that's just, again, just to get ready here. The default sound that we want is very, very light. Okay, so here's the next thing that you can do, especially if you have a piano and you're a little more comfortable with how your range works. You can hit a note and then practice this process of listening, audiating, singing a pitch, trying to hit the mark, and then wherever you land, sliding up to where the actual pitch is. And we'll talk about how you can kind of feel that out, and then stopping and trying to just hit right on the target. So I think sometimes when we're when we're just learning how to do this, it can be very frustrating because once you get sort of off, our ear can get kind of fooled. And so we can get really disoriented rather quickly because pitch is a kind of a complex thing, and there's all these overtones and often other notes playing around us. So this is about how to keep ourselves sort of anchored in our physical sensation, as well as some of these conceptual things we're going to do a little later in the lesson. And yes, I do teach how to play piano and guitar and ukulele. You start to kind of add these as you go. But I do recommend that actually for every singer, it's good to have a little bit of basic piano skill. And you don't have to learn like in a classical way, but just getting your fingers on a keyboard, getting a sense of where your pitches are, where your range is, and just following along so that you have an anchor or some sort of external force to work with. You can also do this online, right? You could just do it on a virtual keyboard. So it doesn't have to be like you need to go and buy an expensive keyboard and take lessons. Definitely can really improve your skills. But in general, you can also just do this by using a lot of these online resources that we have now, we're kind of in a golden age of that to get some external feedback. And of course, a teacher is going to be really, really helpful with this as well if you really want to up your game. So we're going to talk about this sort of process that I like to use when I'm working with someone who's learning how to match targets in a more physical sensation way. So this is, it really is knowing how to play and even accompany yourself with basic chords. It's just so helpful. It's really hard to learn to sing a cappella, and it's kind of, singing just without any accompaniment. It's really easy for us to get lost. And so using instruments like this helps work with our tonal memory and our muscle memory as well. So here's this process again. I like to get a little specific so we can have a real practice that we work with. So I'm going to play a pitch, like for example, that pitch. This is more of a tenor baritone range, and I'm going to listen to it. So I can target it in my mind. And then we have this thing that we call audiating, which is a really cool concept that you can practice. And conductors do this all the time. It's sort of like a secret little music trick that we do a lot. And you might notice that you actually you have done this before. Like, for example, think about one of your favorite songs and imagine your mind's ear. So think about like your mind's eye is like when you're thinking about think about a pink elephant, right? And somewhere in your mind, you can start to visualize what it means to be pink and what an elephant looks like in its shape, its contour. And you can do the same thing actually with sound, and we call it audiating, where I'm trying to hear a version of myself singing without actually singing. Sometimes there's this habit that happens when we're unsure of our pitches, and I'm guilty of doing this, where we want to gently hum where our pitch is before we start singing. But the strongest tool is actually just to have a really crystal clear image of it in your mind of where that pitch is. So this takes actually some focus. And the more repetition you have singing these notes, the more the stronger your audiation is going to get. And this is true for practicing songs as well. So listen, audiate. Now I'm going to purposefully not hit the right note to show you this practice. So, so I assessed when I just put a pitch out there, because it takes a while for our body to learn how to do this, and we're sort of teaching our body to track to the right pitch with our focus, right? So I'm targeting it, I'm listening, I'm audiating, and then when I sang, I assessed, is that lower or higher than the pitch? No, not that way, right? And then I slide my voice to the right position. So this is actually a really simple practice you can do, and stay light with it. So like, let's say, for example, I pick a much higher note, like here, I listen, stop, audiate. Let's say I don't quite hit it. Or maybe I overshoot it. And then I let myself sort of slide back to that spot. It's just a great way to sort of train your body and start to feel like what's too much pressure, what's just the right amount of pressure. And it's also just this complex process of our focus. Like, it's very complicated how our body is getting up to pressure. We don't have to worry so much about the physics of it as much as just really go through this practice and feel it out. So it seems like a really simple thing, but I'm just trying to get something that helps us get started. If you are not used to singing before, this is a great thing to just make sure that you can physically follow pitches that people are playing. A lot of the times, singing teachers, we just throw you in and we're just try to repeat after me, try to follow along. If I notice someone's really struggling with pitch, though, I'll stop and I'll work with them on sliding to find the right pitch. Now, I've done a live stream about pitch before, and one thing we talked about, and also music theory, is this sensation of physical beats that happen when you're close to a pitch. And then how it sort of feels like everything kind of gets clear like water when you're more on the pitch. So for example, if I'm like trying to hit a random note, let's say I'm just new to this, right? Like, if I'm really close to it, we get this sort of distortion that we can actually start to perceive. And this is how you can be much more subtle about making sure you're hitting the sweet spot. You can also, again, look at like an online tuner and actually watch it in real time when you're getting closer and closer to the pitch. And then what is that sensation when you lock into place? It is so, so important to keep practicing this. In fact, it's sort of one of the things that um, we get out of shape with. You know, we think about like our voice getting out of shape physically and like strain and tension and all of that. But a lot of singers can get lazy with their intonation, and doing this as a regular practice actually strengthens your ear, your focus, and your ability to just get to the right pitches. And then eventually you're able to really hear everything you're about to sing, and then sing it. And that's a really, really comforting sensation. There's nothing worse than just not quite knowing what's next and just shooting a random arrow out into the dark, right? So um, this game. It seems really simple, but it's a good place to start. I play a pitch. I'm trying to assess, like, am I under the pitch? Am I over the pitch? And then practice sliding around until you can get to that sweet spot. So again, it starts with just doing this basic SOVT practice, going like, or or just do a basic sort of more narrow vowel like very, very light. And then I'm going to use a piano or an online piano. Hit a note and I'm too low, right? And then there's this sound effect when we lock into the right place that everything feels very clear and we don't get very much distortion. So that's that feeling. And then once you get there, then stop and try to do the whole thing faster and try to see if you can memorize exactly where that feeling was, right? This is tonal memory, our ability to hear the pitch, and also our ability to feel how much pressure we need. So and I drop right in. So again, here's this process. Here's a pitch. Maybe I go too high. I'm like, and then I stop. And I sing right into the center of it. So you can do this for a while, and it just helps to train your body in a really comfortable way, staying very, very light. And then we get to this concept of, okay, how does it work, and what are our scales and our numbers? So a lot of times we do number games, right? We talk about like the major scale being the most common scale to start with. There's so much variation in music that you can really get lost very quickly in a lot of complexity, like working on modes and really, really complex, interesting things that are happening. You know, a lot of the times we want interesting music, so there's some sort of strange thing that's happening outside of our major scale. But we want to find first songs that fit our basic major scale and work with that. And so, you know, I'll teach numbers as a really quick shorthand before we get into solfege. So this is doing like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm just playing a C major scale here. So I'm using white notes on the piano, starting from C and moving to C again. And 8 and 1 are interchangeable. So this pattern in music repeats over and over again. And our major scale has some key features, right? There's a half step, which is our smallest unit in music, between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. And that's just kind of what defines the sound. It's something that we're all pretty used to hearing a lot. So it's just a matter of getting comfortable with it, first with numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The numbers help us keep an order over them. Now, I've talked about like there's minor scales, for example, where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You can see I'm using the same numbers, but a totally different sound. This is where it gets complicated, and it actually is really helpful to start learning solfege. It takes a second, but I think I just want to spend some of today going over this process. It's kind of an iconic thing, right? This concept of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. I did the major scale with solfege. There's a particular combination of consonants and vowels for each specific spot, and it helps us memorize that spot and sort of its function, because I can actually start to change half steps. For example, there's a slightly different version for the minor, and it changes only where we need to have changes between a major and a minor scale. So again, stop me if I'm getting a little too far ahead of myself and confusing people. But I'm going to go over this process, and we're going to talk about some of our basic sort of number games, but we're going to do them with solfege to help sort of learn the solfege system. With the system, the brighter vowels like E are kind of to help us stay elevated with our pitch in places where we tend to go too flat in our major scale. And then vowels that are more like A or Ah, as it's more open, it helps us not get too high in these moments where we might actually get off the scale by going sharp. So for example, we've got do, re, mi, and that mi, that third, we always want it to be a little higher. So that's why they sort of naturally and intuitively, this solfege system has that E there. And then between 3 and 4, mi and fa, this is where people tend to go sharp. So they go like do, re, mi, fa, and they keep going with the same shape, but that's just not how the major scale works. So that fa, that taller, open ah vowel, it just helps guide us towards a slightly lower sound, actually, so we can get that little half step change. So do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do. So that's kind of how the solfege system works and sort of why it is the way that it is. I'll keep going. So we've got do, re, mi, fa, sol, and I'm counting to show you it's the same thing as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do, re, mi, fa, sol. So and do have a similar kind of sound structurally to each other, and so they both have that nice O shape. And then we've got sol, la, ti. That's a place where people tend to go a little flat. We've got that nice T. We call it the leading tone, leading back up to ti, do, back to that nice O shape. So you can see it's kind of designed into it to sort of help singers. That's why we have this. And again, it's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we can take some of our basic pitch practice exercises and do it with solfege to help learn the solfege system. And so what I'm talking about is like our bungee style scales, right? When we go like 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. But now we're going to do it with solfege. So I'll go over it and feel free to use this as a way to practice. And there's actually cool little hand symbols that people do. And it's funny, I actually learned off of solfege back in the day and use numbers for shorthand to really help teach in a fast way. But solfege goes through my brain a lot when I'm working with songs, and it sort of mixes between numbers and solfege. I use really just any tool that's available to help orient myself in the moment, because that's the messy business of staying in tune and how music works. Isn't that funny? So yeah, we've got do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And even the hand shapes are helping to guide people with the changes of those whole steps and half steps to keep us oriented. So here's the bungee scale with solfege. It's do, do, re, do, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. So as you're doing this, you might notice that it's just a little smoother to sing, actually, than 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. when we do our numbers, there's a lot of extra motion with our lips. Ultimately, the goal is to be able to do this on just a basic syllable, right? We don't need to use any solfege once we know how to do this. It could be like da 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 da, etc., etc. So that's one way that we can do our bungee scale. The other way we can do it is moving up one and then a little higher every single time and going through our scale this way. So this one, I was doing 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1 as sort of a stepwise thing. You can also do it as leaps. So this could be like do, do, re, do, mi, do, fa, do, so, do, la, do, ti, do. And that way you're actually working on your ability to just jump to the right position. Again, you might find that you hit the wrong notes as you start to do bigger leaps like this. And let's say, for example, you're trying to get to T, and you're going do, ti, and you can slide up to it, right? So do, ti, ti, do, and that way it'll help sort of guide your voice there in a really healthy way. Again, that's my main process here, is sort of a natural way to practice things. So that's solfege, and you can do a lot of the same exercises that we work on with numbers as solfege, and that was with the major scale. Now, here's where it gets really cool, actually, and more nuanced than using numbers. I could do a minor scale with a slightly different solfege, and it's intentionally different. It sounds like this. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do, te, le, so, fa, mi, re, do. So what you'll notice is I changed a couple key spots. I changed mi to me, la to le, and ti to te. And the reason is because that slightly more open vowel helps us understand that it's a little lower, actually, than where mi was. For example, mi, me, it's a half step lower. And I'm playing this in a parallel position from the one that I did with the major scale. So C major to C minor. And same thing with la. It's do, re, mi, fa, sol. We've got le instead of la, le. So that just helps me feel that out with the vowel changes. Same thing with T. Instead of ti, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do, we've got do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te. So te, ti, do, ti, te. So that actually it's very specific. And then I can start to actually keep track of the changes I'm making to get from one scale to the other. So this is where it gets kind of advanced. But I think in general, the cool thing again about solfege is it's supposed to kind of guide us with sensation and how the vowel shapes sort of work in general to just give us a little more ease in this process. So I'm going to sing the major scale, and then I'm going to sing the minor scale just back to back so you can really hear this again. So we've got do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. That's the major one. And then do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do, te, le, so, fa, mi, re, do. So that just helps you keep them separate. And sometimes in songs, we're switching between different scales. And it's helpful to think about them as major or minor. So this is this game. The difference between major and minor are those three spots. We've got the third, mi, turning into me from major to minor. We've got the 6, la, going to le, and we've got the 7, ti, going to te. Now, the cool thing is once you learn these two scales, major and minor, there are some other changes that happen, but that's actually most of the notes that we can come across. And what I mean is that when you're getting really, really good at this, you're actually keeping track of every single half step going from C to C, for example. So let's take a sec and you can just really slow down and actually count them all. So if we can keep track of this, then we have a much better sense of all the possible spots that we can get to. And if you do this kind of practice, then you just start to hear it a lot better. So for example, okay, here's our first pitch, C, that's one note. And then we've got C to the next half step. So I'm just going on the piano. I'm just actually going from white to black note, just the note right next to it. And in the two spots where there's a half step, where there's no black note, just going right to that next white note. So I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then I'm back to the octave again. So there's 12 spots that I have to memorize. And that's kind of what's really confusing about music in general is we have these 12 different options, and people tend to get stuck in between our basic scale degrees. They get stuck between these sort of weird spots, and they're not used to them. Now, if we're doing them intentionally in certain jazz music and like certain special chords, then all of a sudden, actually, those it really helps us sort of guide through these really sort of odd changes and getting to some really interesting chords. And that's sort of this process. So you can actually, even as a beginner, you can go through and just feel out each of these spots and what does it feel like, each half step. And then what's so cool with solfege is depending on if you're going up or down, you can actually change the syllables to help sort of guide you in the right way. So I'm going to show you this. This is the full chromatic scale. And then we'll talk about just practicing chromaticism and hearing all the different intervals. And again, it seems maybe overwhelming, but just be slow about it. And once you get used to all the possible spots, you just start to hear them much better. So if I'm going up, there's this whole process of using a lot of E to help us sort of keep elevating. So I've got do, di, re, re, mi, fa, fi, so, si, la, li, ti, do. And I did all of the half steps, and that is that's going up with all of our half steps. Hi, welcome. I'm kind of doing a little bit for everybody here. So for very beginners, we're just trying to track the pitch, make sure that we can follow along, and eventually you just get a better, much clearer sense of, that's totally fine. Don't worry about being late. You can always watch the rest of this. But it just eventually, by going over all of these spots, we just have a much clearer sense of what's available to us when we're singing and when we're slipping in between our basic major and minor scale. So again, going up, all these E vowels. Do, di, re, re, mi, fa, fi, so, si, la, li, ti, do. And then going down, it's the opposite. Do, ti, te, la, le, so, se, fa, mi, me, re, ra, do. So you can see it's actually kind of a vowel theory that helps guide voices into the right positions. And depending on if you're thinking about it up and down, those sound shapes can change. A lot of people get overwhelmed, as you can see with solfege, because it's so specific. But I actually think of it a little more like sort of like an analytical way of like, I can use this concept and I can actually help guide myself by picking and choosing if I want to think of it as an elevated scale degree or a lowered scale degree, depending on what I'm doing in my music, and they'll just start to pop up into your brain sometimes. So this takes a little bit of time, and you can always just use numbers. I'm going to make sure to do a live stream at some point soon on just how the whole breath system works and getting a little more specific. There are some myths that I've been seeing, just some sort of odd tactics online, like squeezing inward, and we want to be really careful about that. But I also want to talk about why people can confuse that sensation and maybe give not as helpful advice on how that sort of works and misinterpret sort of what the body is doing. So a lot of this is slowing down, paying attention to the muscle memory. Now, 100%, that's a big part of this. I want people to show up and tell me what they want to work on and what they're interested in. So again, I just am explaining sort of this next step in intonation, which is actually keeping track of every single possible spot. And it seems scary, but there's actually only 12 of them. And in a scale, when it's a typical scale and not chromatic, we're basically just using 7 at a time. And so it's not all of them. And that's what makes this really challenging, right? The major scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 8 and 1, again, are interchangeable. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Or solfege. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. That's this game. That was the major scale. Now with numbers, I could just know that it's minor in my ear and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Or I can get specific with the solfege and be do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, te, do, te, le, so, fa, mi, re, do. Being able to keep track of these two things helps me switch between major and minor much easier. And I've done this one before, but sometimes the best way to practice these half steps, aside from numbers and solfege, is to break it up into chunks. So we've got, for example, like from 1 to 3, 1, 2, 3, we've got da, 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 da. We've got all those little spots in between. That's 1 change, 2 changes, 3 changes, and then 4 changes. So this is, you can see why this gets confusing with music, right? It's like, this is a third in a major scale, but there's actually 4 half steps in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, da, 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 da. That's from 1 to 3. 3, 4, 4.5, 5, right? So mi, fa, fi, so. That's going from 3 to 5. And then so, si, la, li, ti, do. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 changes for that last one. So if you get used to doing that, again, those are all of the notes. And I know it's a little overwhelming at first, but the more you practice this, there's not that many of them, right? And they repeat over and over again. Now I'm going to do something that's a really fun way to practice the half steps. It's by using a drone, and we're practicing this chromatic scale, every single possible spot. You don't have to know the solfege or the numbers. Just follow along again if you're a beginner. But notice how it feels to sit with each interval. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to hit this low C, and I'm going to start from the top, and I'm going to go na, na. Right, that's one little spot. Da, da, da. That's the next one, right? Na, 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 na. And I'm sliding all the way down back to 1. You'll find if you're not following with the piano, it's hard to keep this really even. And that's when we tend to get off, right? Because we make too big of a jump or too small of a jump. And then we've gone off from our musical scale and from our piano. So I'll do this without it eventually. I'll be like, na, 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 na. You get really comfortable actually just feeling out what each one really, when it locks into this kind of interesting, beautiful interval. And again, there's a physical sensation to each one. Like, na, na, na. They kind of lock into spot. So you can kind of shift around. You can use one of those piano guides, and you can actually just, and ultimately can kind of feel it. And this is what people are doing when we're singing like a cappella, when we're singing with a choir. we're feeling out what these different intervals are like, and adjusting in real time, right? And that's choirs tend to drift a lot because we don't have these. We often, sometimes we have a piano or other instruments with us. We don't necessarily, so we actually have to remember what these things feel like, and then what that sounds like when we're contributing in the right way and creating that interval with another singer. So this is this game, but I guess what I'm trying to point out is there's a physical sensation to it. And by going through them and just sort of really tracking it out and slowing down, you'll get more comfortable with the physical sensation of each interval. Um, and then also there's all these really cool systems to help you catalog them and keep track of them. Now, when I'm working on a song, the thing that's kind of a little more of the analysis that you can do before you just dive into it is actually trying to figure out like what scale degree or what solfege does the song start on, right? What are some main features? And eventually you can do the entire song and figure out what each of them are. So I'll do a simple one. Um, my basic little lullaby. Now, can you hear what those intervals were? So again, so I'm in this in C major. So in my ear, I might go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or go do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, so, fa, mi, re, do. Now, those are all the possible spots. Now I'm listening to it. So I can just do it in my head. I can go 1, 5, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And those are the numbers. You can paint by numbers with your voice. When you get really good at this, I just hear it in my head. Do, so, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. I picked this one because it's actually an old Mozart sonata, and and it's turned into a lullaby. And there's a section that I just think is really fun because it takes the whole pattern like that and it turns it minor, and it goes like this. So yeah, go check out that sonata. It's this case. If I were to use solfege, right, I could do the numbers. I could go 1, 1, 5, 5, 6, 6, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1. Very somber lullaby. Or I can get more specific. Instead of do, so, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. It's going to be do, so, le, so, fa, me, re, do. So you can start to see like solfege is kind of like this weird little extra language that's designed to help singers stay in tune and sing in a smooth way. And me being able to hear that difference between so, la, so, le, so helps to really make sure that I stay in either the major or the minor mode. And you can see that you can just start to practice with this and do all sorts of things once you get really, really comfortable with it. Track it along with the piano, use a teacher to help guide you. And it's sort of the key to starting to learn to read music and to learn songs a lot faster. Pick up what's happening in the room around you when someone is trying to harmonize. It's all part of this. So I'm going to respond to some of these, to the question. Yeah, you have to be careful about the jaw thing. When in general, the jaw tends to get really tight, right, when we're singing. So one thing is to think about this concept of ventriloquism. I talk about it as like breathing in a vowel. You can have it sort of set and open before you start singing. And really the way that we work our vowel shapes is I like to think about glides between, it's the lips with the vowels of oo, o, and ah, and then our back heel of our tongue, e, a, and ah. And when we talk, it's very visual. We tend to move it all at once and go like e, a, ah, and you can see that the jaw is engaged that entire time. Instead, ya, 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 ya. You can wiggle your jaw, breathe in that sort of ventriloquist, like open shape. Ya, 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 ya. And try to get just the heel of your tongue moving. And again, I can wiggle it and be like, ya, 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 ya. And of course, really where a lot of the activity is right here. So you can also do that. Sometimes if your head and your neck is out of alignment and it's up like this, it's really hard to relax our jaw too. So make sure that you put your hands sort of behind your head, look in a mirror, make sure that you keep this sort of lined up here. And you can move your head and your neck around as you're singing. So I'll do the twinkle, twinkle, little star. I could go, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. So you can see I can make pretty clear enunciation without too much motion. So a lot of our vocal practice is designed to find efficiency. Some of the things like little, people go little versus little star, la la. If I'm just using the tip of my tongue to make that L, then I'm way less likely to engage my jaw too much and chew my words. So a lot of it is about finding that. There's all sorts of reasons why we can get jaw tension. Some of it has to do with our breath pressure, like I think you were asking about that earlier as well. So stick around, and we'll keep talking about this. But that's one of the big strategies here, is actually just trying to get out of the way with our jaw, use our lips, our tongue. And part of the reason I'm bringing up the whole solfege thing is it just helps us work on our numbers in a way where we're not fatiguing our face so much. So again, if I'm doing like do, do, re, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do. A lot of these are designed to get breath flowing, like fa or mi is helping us get a little bit of that buildup of pressure. And they're not complicated words that make us chew, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, because numbers in general almost feel a little more speech-like, right? Because that's generally how we use them. And these are just pure syllable connections, right? Like consonant to vowel. And that's why a lot of the exercises, it might seem like a little dry at some points or repetitive, but a lot of the reason we're reducing down to just basic combinations of one consonant and one vowel is to help simplify and really focus on what we're doing with our coordination, because there's just a lot happening when we're singing. We're working through a lot of different words. And that, when we learn these sort of key moments where we can find efficiency, it helps just to keep everything else relaxed and flowing. And again, that main concept is ventriloquism, which is this feeling of having an open, relaxed space and kind of slowly shaping and moving around that space. The more that we move it all together, we're just creating a lot of excess motion. And that's where a lot of the tension starts to back up. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So in a private lesson, we work on all of these kinds of things. I take people through, there's actually some content on like what happens in a first lesson. I think it was one of our previous live streams. So I would go check that out. And I go through check by check all of these sort of things. And we figure out we kind of hone in on what we need to work on as a student. So people come from all different sort of skill levels. But from the very beginning, I talk about the body and stretches that help us sort of find the right posture so that we can get the right kind of breath. And so there's this hierarchy to it. That's why I always kind of start this way. We do, yeah, absolutely. So we do posture to breath, and then breath and having these combination of these two things helps us get resonance and alignment. So I work on vowel shapes and those glides. And then we go to support conditioning, working with SOVTs, with our consonants to help us negotiate pressure. Then we would often go to registration, like talking about chest voice and head voice. And that can get really advanced as, you're working with more advanced singers. We do mixing and sort of navigating between the two registers. That's all technical stuff. And then a lot of the times, before I can really get to that technical stuff, we've got to work on pitch practice and matching. And that's the key step towards learning songs and really making sure that you're singing them in tune, is you have to make sure you have control over your technique and then have a sense about the targets and sort of where they are. And every song you can learn that particular pattern. You can use music to help guide you, but you can also just do it by ear. And, this is why I actually teach the by ear thing first, because I think it helps us understand written music a lot better. And singers don't necessarily have to actually look at notes on the page to interpret music with your ear. And it's this concept of audiating. You start to actually hear it. You'll listen to songs and I'll be like, I can hear, where's the one, for example. Like I can find the one, find the scale, sing through the scale, and then I can keep track of where the melody is and what sort of part of the scale it's sitting on. And if I'm lost, then I'll go and I'll really try to figure it out and match it up with the piano, look up the chords. Um, yeah, absolutely. No, that I always recommend, voice lessons are a great way to sort of hone in on what you actually need to work on, because again, not everyone needs to work on everything. Sometimes for pitch, it's already actually not so bad in terms of the connection. It's just, but then some people actually have issues tracking with it. And this, happens in music school all the time, right? Or like in school, and everyone goes through some music classes, and there's that poor student who's having trouble matching pitch and it doesn't come automatically. And often there's so many students that it's really hard for a teacher to slow down and work with them. That's where a private teacher can come into place. Just slowing down and getting that to match up and to track, getting a few songs under your belt, and all of a sudden you're going to have a much easier time matching pitch. And that's usually one of the big barriers that a lot of singing students have. So this game. We work on the physical aspects of moving our pitch around, staying really light. And then we work on the mental aspect, which is keeping track of where the targets are. And we can use numbers. We can use solfege if we want to get really fancy and get specific, or if we're just trying to get a more comfortable flow as we're working on this, right? And then eventually we get to this sort of next concept, which is how you can sort of quiz yourself, or you can have someone quiz you, is something called tonal memory. And you can actually look up all sorts of cool videos of like savant kids or people who have a really trained ear, being able to keep track of all of the pitches and sort of spit them out and follow them. And this is this skill, it's just to its advanced level. And oftentimes in auditions, we'll do this to sort of guide people. But the first step is actually to try to make sense of the relationship with the pitches. So let's say I'm going to keep it easy. I'll stick in major or minor, and I'll play a couple notes, usually like 3 or 4, and then you try to sing them back. And this is this tonal memory. It's like, how long does it stay in your mind's ear, in your audiation? And the more times you do this, and the more songs you get, the more it's just in your brain. And this is what conductors do all the time, is they have learned their music so deeply that it's in their mind, and they can hear it, and it becomes their gesture. And then the gesture helps everyone sing the right way. And I swear, if the conductor isn't thinking about it, singers, we don't all do it in a unified way. But if that person has a really clear intention, it's much easier for us to all sing it exactly the right way. It's almost like a psychic sort of body language like thing that happens, which is really, really cool. So I'm going to show you tonal memory like this, for example. Start easy. So here we are in C. There we go. All right, nice little melody. Now, can you figure out what the numbers are? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I would hear that and go, da, 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 da. It's really easy for me to remember, 1, because I came up with it, but 2, because I can hear that it's 5, 3, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2, 3, or so, mi, re, mi. And I know it from a couple different angles. And I think that's actually really, really key. That's why I was mentioning the solfege thing, because let's say I played this. Sounds totally different. Really weird. Same numbers, actually, in this case. So I'm just using a minor scale. It's 5, 3, 2, 3. But the solfege is a much clearer way of explaining this. I mean, so, me, re, me. Totally different feeling. So just giving sort of a little window into what's going through people's minds when they're really making sure that they're in tune. That's a slightly more advanced interpretive way that you can do in real time. The harder they get, the more outside of the pattern they are, and you can really start to train your brain this way. There's also lots of little phone apps that help work this, where they'll they'll play a pitch and they'll be like, is this pitch higher or lower? And you can just start to do this while you're like waiting in line, and you can all of a sudden train the skill and your ability to interpret that as almost like a reflex. And that's kind of what we want, is we've trained it so much that it becomes automatic, and we just go right to the right pitch. We hear it in our head and we sing it. The more you practice something, the stronger it sits in your brain. So that's really this game. And then, they can get harder. It could be like some random thing. Like it could be like, and in that case, using the half steps and understanding all of that can really help you follow along. You might not be able to interpret as much as just try to use some notes to anchor yourself and keep track of it. But, when are you going to come across something weird like that? Not that often. So a lot of the times it's actually just, yes, this is ear training. Exactly. That's sort of the whole game that we're doing here. A lot of the times we're not going to come across something that hard. So what I recommend actually is going to songs that you really like and trying to get a sense of, what the actual intervals are. You can use numbers or you can use the solfege and try to actually recreate it. It might be a song that you already know, and it'll just make sure that you really, really understand exactly where each spot's supposed to be. This helps our technique in general, because if you know where the pitch is supposed to be, our body has a lot easier time getting there. So these two things kind of work simultaneously, right? First, we worked on just our ability to get our voice moving around. Once you know the targets, it actually helps you move around your voice better too. So this is kind of the nature of this game and how it works. So there's a whole road towards ear training, understanding chords and how things fit in a chord. And ultimately, like a lot of the advanced ear training skills that you're going to learn are just in practice, singing with a choir, trying to harmonize with someone, and having someone who's been more familiar with music kind of point you towards when a chord really locks in place. So, they might be like, oh, you need to be a little higher right there, a little lower. And then once it locks in place, they've had the experience with it like that, and you try to really save that feeling. And the more songs, again, that you start to do this with, the better you get at, for example, voicing like a major 7. Na, na, na. It's really hard for people sometimes when we're on these really interesting intervals. Like, for example, this one, people tend to sing kind of flat. So there's just all sorts of things that you'll start to learn over time. And the more you can understand piano and theory skills, the easier you're going to be able to orient yourself as well. So that's really this concept here. And then also I wanted to mention training yourself to hear pitches with different instruments is really important, because they all have slightly different harmonic language to them. They all sound a little different. And so like matching pitch with a guitar compared to matching pitch with the piano can feel very, very different. In fact, they're often tuned slightly differently. So it gets messy out in the wild, and we ultimately have to use our intuition. So slowing down and listening and having some external advice is ultimately the best way to make sure that something locks in the way that you want it to. Like, not everything is perfectly 100% in tune. In fact, you'll listen to like recordings that have been melodined, right? This is a program that helps us move pitches around after they've been recorded, and it sounds like super auto-tuned. It sounds robotic, and you'll listen to some famous songs, and they're not quite perfectly hitting intervals, but it fits with the expression. And so sometimes there's a little bit of wiggle room in there, right? Bending notes. So it is really just a feeling-based thing. But if you're hearing a lot that like people are saying you're really out of tune, you're probably slipping in between the scale degrees in a way that isn't intentional, and that's usually going to sound weird to people's ears. The classic one is like the Star Spangled Banner. People sing it a cappella, and then they start modulating around without realizing it, right? And that's something you want to avoid. And you can always just track it with the piano, right? Follow along on one of these online websites, or use a teacher. And I can pretty quickly, with anyone, if you're not sure, I can pretty quickly tell you if you're singing in tune or out of tune with the song, even if, it's harder when I don't have the chords and I'm not, there's not like extra music playing. But if you're singing along to a track, you can tell pretty quickly. But even a cappella, you can actually tell because of the relationships, if someone is drifting a lot. So it starts to become like an extra sense that you get, right? Your ability to organize these pitches. And again, just to not freak people out, what's cool about this practice is it's actually a very physical practice that you can get your ear in shape. There's cool research that's coming out that's about how the resolution of sort of distinct pitches gets clearer the more we practice it. They, studying musicians versus untrained ears. So even just the process of getting familiar with it is teaching our brain, one, how to make sense of the pitches, like with solfege and stuff, but also even just helping us get a clearer image. So even just sitting here and trying to match pitches and following along and sliding like that, if you do it with some repetition, you're actually going to it's going to get easier over time. So it feels really murky at first. All the pitches are kind of like floating together, and it's hard to pick them apart and make sense of it. Be patient with yourself, keep working on this, and maybe get some outside help. And you'll realize that, over time, it just gets clearer and clearer. So hopefully this just gets people thinking about this a little more and starting to think about solfege. It's sort of an old style, but it actually, is very, very helpful when we get a little more specific. And it can help you just really keep track of all the pitches. And again, there's not that many, right? It's just they repeat over and over again, and we're constantly moving around from one to the other. So it's just hard to organize them. Yeah, well, awesome work, everyone. I will see you all in a few weeks, I think. Yeah, it does. It really, the music theory is a very well understood theory. It's actually something I think as humans, we can be very proud about. It's something that it's a physical force, and we actually think of it more like you're discovering these positions than something that's very constructed. So that's why I'm saying you can start by just throwing yourself in and try to match pitches, and eventually you'll start to organize them all. So awesome work. Great to see some familiar people and some new people, and I look forward to working with you guys whenever I see you next with the next live stream. So take care, everyone, and good luck on your singing journey.